Let's explain how it works. The receptor sits in the membrane, has an antenna sticking up, and look at the bottom. Watch what happens when a signal comes in. The signal, remember, the environmental signals cause a conformation change. So look at the shape. So if I'm inside the cell, I know if the signal is there because I can look at it. But when the signal goes away, then the conformation goes back. So remember, I showed you this. Conformation 1, conformation 2. What was the difference between 1 and 2? The signal. So when a signal comes in, the antenna receptor changes its structure. Now the other proteins, the channel looks like this. When we look at the channels inside the membrane, they too float around inside the membrane, but a channel is different because a channel is closed. And we said the channel works when it opens up. So when a signal comes in, it opens up, and then information or molecules can shoot down the tunnel, down into the cell. And it can only do it when it opens and closes. But look, the wrong size signals don't go in, so the channels regulate which things can get in by opening and closing. So what we looked at is this. We saw signals come into antennas and change the structure of the receptor, and we saw that the output device, in this case a channel, can open or close when the signal comes in. Now let's put them together and see what happens when they come together. And the answer is this. The antenna on the left is going to scan the environment. Notice the shape of the protein inside the cell. It's a smooth tube. This is a connector called the G protein. Look at its shape. Can it plug onto that? Yes or no? No. Look at the shape. It won't fit. So that when no signal is there, that connector doesn't connect. But when the signal shows in, it changes the shape, connects this one to this one, changes this one, and this makes a signal. So I have an environmental signal coming in the antenna, and then the channel on the right converts that signal into behavior. Do you understand? It's a switch. So let's see if I can do this one again. If I can show it to you again, it works like this. Again, watch this. This is what controls biology. Antennas receive the signal from the environment, and when a signal is received, it changes the shape of the protein and allows the connecting device to connect the receptor to the output. The output is the channel. The channel creates a signal that enters into the cell, and that signal that now is going to go enter into the cell activates the functions of the cell. It causes the cell to move. It causes the cell to digest things. It causes the cell to change its structure or behavior. So the fact is what? This is a signaling device. This is the actual device that controls the behavior of the cell. So how does it work? Well, the receptor picks up a stimulus, right? Say yeah or no. So we go like, yeah. Okay, yeah. And then the output goes through the channel because the channel is closed, and when the signal comes, the channel opens, and then the signal goes down and activates the functions of the cell. So the stimulus is received by the receptor, and the response is produced by the channel or the effector. So when I put that together, what does it mean? It says this. It says stimulus response, that biology is stimulus response, that the inputs, the signals from the environment, are collected by the receptors, and the receptors read the environment, whether they're reading the external environment or the internal environment. But once they receive a signal, I get a response. That's the output. Behavior is a response. So the output is mediated by effectors, such as the channel. So the bottom line is this. Environmental signals elicit behavior. Got it? If I remove the environmental signals, what behavior do I have? None. And this is an interesting point. As I said, I could take the nucleus out of the cell. I don't change the behavior at all. But if I go to the cell and cut off the antennas, the cell has no behavior. Now just think for a second. Stop and just think for the profound meaning of what this says. Then the behavior you're expressing is what? A reflection of the signals that come from the environment. So all of a sudden, your behavior is not coming from the inside as much as it's totally a reflection of what you see on the outside. And so that this is changing your life is through this. But this device is what controls the cell. That there are thousands and thousands of these input and output devices controlling the cell. Now, is it clear at least that how this acts as a switch? Say yes or no so I know we're doing okay. Well, if now you recognize that each one of these things can activate a function of the cell. Now, this is the beautiful part, because I'm going to let you say the words. Is it true or not that the receptor represents awareness of the environment? Okay. Is it true or not that when the channels or whatever the output devices are start to create a physical response, that they create a physical sensation in the cell? Okay, so is this what controls the cell, or at least a function within the cell, yes or no? What is this called? And the answer is, in the dictionary, there is a word for this. And the word is perception. Awareness of the environment through physical sensation. And basically, so you just saw the labeling of what? A device that controls the cell. What is this device that controls the cell? Known as perception. So are you controlled by genes? No. You're controlled by perception. Perception is how you read the environment and adjust your behavior. It makes sense because if your behavior is linked to the environment, then you're coordinated with the environment. If your behavior is not connected to what's going on in the environment, you're out of sync, and that actually is neurological problems in many cases when your behavior doesn't fit the environment. So the point about it is this: cells started to come together into community. And why this was relevant is each cell is reading what it should do by reading the environment. But when cells start to come together in a community to make a multicellular organism like you or myself, then something has to happen. What's different about the individual versus a community? And it's this: if I'm just a free living cell, I can walk around and do anything I want and it doesn't make any difference. But if I join a community, then the word community has meaning. It means communication. It means holding it together. That as an individual cell in the community, I can't do what I want to do. I have to do what the community agrees. That's part of the deal. If I give up my independence, I give it up to join the community. But the reason for joining the community is I've got greater chance of survival with more members all working together. That's what community is all about. That's why people came together to form communities instead of living alone, because community brings greater life. But when I look at that, then here's the important understanding. If a cell doesn't listen to the community's voice, then the cell is not part of the community. Cancer cells have withdrawn from the community. They're still in there, but they're not listening to the voice of the community. They're doing their own thing. Why would some cells get out of the community? And the answer is, why are people homeless? Why are people out of work, or why are people separating? If the community is not supporting them at some point, the cells recognize, my God, what do I want to be in this for? So there's a point that cancer starts to recognize as a result of breakdown of community. Well, let's look at cells moving in community. This is a movement of a bunch of cells, and I'm going to show you the communication using a special dye. I can show you how the cells are communicating in this community. There's a dye that you can see the nervous connection of cells. Now in this one, the dye lights up. It's a fluorescent dye. Now you see the sparkling and flashing? That's the neurological process of each individual cell. But watch what happens. Waves of information start. Why? Because the cells are connected to each other. So the actions of some cells are spreading to other cells. So what you're actually looking at, it's sort of like an electroencephalograph of cells. You're watching cells talking to each other because cells work together in a community. When the community falls apart, that's when disease starts to happen, because that means that they're not, for some reason, they're not being supported, and that will then lead to the end of the community. So the point about it is this. Each cell has a brain. That's a fact. Each cell can read the environment and adjust its function for whatever it sees. But when cells get in a community, they defer their own belief system or their own system of what they're seeing to the central command. So as you can see here, I have a cell here on the right-hand side, marked in purple over here, that this cell is out here in the environment. But what should its function be? Well, the answer is it's going to be coordinated by the brain, because the brain is going to tell all the cells what we should do to work together to provide for the success of my living organism. So the brain gets in between the environment and the cell. The cell no longer reads its own environment. The cell depends on the central nervous system to tell us about the environment. So the bottom line is this. The cell on the right is intelligent. It will always be able to adjust itself to the environment. That's when I was taking cells out of sick people and putting them in culture, they started to get better, because when left alone, they could say, man, I could live comfortably alone without being in that system anymore. And then, so the fact is, so what regulates a cell now? When it's in a community, the cell reads the environment, which is the left side, but it doesn't read it directly. It now reads the environment through the brain, and the brain interprets the environment and then tells the cell what adjustment it should do to live in the environment that is seen. And the issue is, in general cases, this wouldn't be any big deal. But the issue deals with, what about our perceptions? Because perception is controlling the cell, not the genes. Well, let's ask some simple questions about perceptions. So you can take a test here, because it's a perception test. And the perception test works like this. Very simple question. Is A, the surface area of A, greater than, equal to, or less than the surface area of B? What's your answer? Less, cool. But that's so easy. Everybody can figure this guy out because they're nice little square boxes. But what if they're not so square? What if they're irregular shapes? So let's take a look at it this way. Okay, you take this test. I'm going to ask 4 questions, and then I'm going to go over the answers. And the questions are basically the same in each one. Is the one country greater than, equal to, or less than the other? Equal to means approximate, okay? So the point is this. From your perception, and they get easier because I don't want, everybody to get all the answers wrong because you'll go home disgruntled. So I make them easier as we go along. The first one, is South America greater than, equal to, or less than Europe in surface area? Okay, hold that. Another tough one, not as tough, but is Scandinavia greater than, equal to, or less than India? Make a decision on that. And if you have trouble with that, let's make an easier one. Alaska and Mexico. And if you really got trouble and you have real vision error, is the North greater than or equal to or less than the South? You got those down? Okay, so now let's look at the answers. The answer is South America is twice as large as Europe. You got that right? You got it right, good. Okay, let's talk about Scandinavia and India. India is 3 times larger than Scandinavia. Did you get that one right? Oh, okay, maybe the easier ones. Let's go to the easier ones. Mexico and Alaska, they're about the same size. Okay? And lastly, the North and the South. The South is twice as large as the North. Okay, everybody got 100. Well, what's the point about this? And the point about it is what? This is your perception. What's it based on? The map. And so the reality is this. Let's look at the map. The map was made by Germans. So where do you think the dead center of the map is? And what's the equator represent? What's the equator represent? It's the midpoint between the North and the South. But on the maps that we have studied ever since we were kids, where's the equator? It's 2/3 down the bottom of the map. So if I adjust the equator and bring it back into the proper order, then this is the map that you will see, because this is the map that was put out by the United Nations. And the relevance of this map is what? It's not the world as you thought it was, right? And it basically, remember that third world, that little place someplace else? The third world is twice as large as the first world. And our perceptions have been off. Our perceptions, which make us act in response to our perception, if we would use this map, if your life was dependent upon getting 100 on this exam, there would be a lot of dead people in this room at some point. So the point is what? The point is perception is what gets between the environment and the cells. But what do we know about perception now? What do we just know? We just heard it. Perceptions may not be right. So rather than calling perception of the environment, beliefs. It's your belief about the environment that adjusts your physiology. And your beliefs become then most important because your beliefs are connected to your genes. And that the expression that you have is related to what you have going on in your head. Think about it. Maybe perhaps think about a time when you were really sick and you said, oh, God, I can't get up. And then somebody said, look, you've got to come to work right now. You've got to do something. You had to change your belief. What happened? You changed your belief, you got up, you got dressed, and you did the job just fine until you were able to go home and say, God, I think I can sit down and be sick now again. And so the issue is this, that the point is the truth. Perception selects genes, but perceptions may not always be right. And therefore, perceptions, by definition, are called beliefs. And therefore, when I put that back into the equation, you're not controlled by genes, you're controlled by belief. And why that also comes to an important point is this. These women dance because their passion in life is to dance. They have no other belief except for the fact that they know they're going to dance. Age is not relevant to these women. Aging is a belief. And the problem with this belief about aging is that it will kill you. The belief of aging will kill you for this reason. As soon as you start to tell yourself in your perception that you can't do something anymore, then your biological system will adjust to prove you right. You will not do what you think you can't do. And the issue that you know has to do with use and disuse. And aging is one of the serious problems of disuse. When we tell people, okay, you're too old, stop doing this. People say, okay, I'm going to retire. My father worked 6.5 days a week. He retired and he died within a year. Why? And most people in some level are involved with sickness and illness. After the signal goes away, then the confirmation goes back. So remember, I showed you this. Confirmation 1, confirmation 2. What was the difference between 1 and 2? The signal. So when a signal comes in, the antenna receptor changes its structure. Now the other proteins, the channel looks like this. Let's explain how it works. The receptor sits in the membrane, has an antenna sticking up, and look at the bottom. Watch what happens when a signal comes in. The signal, remember, the environmental signals cause a conformation change. So look at the shape. So if I'm inside the cell, I know if the signal is there because I can look at it. But when look at the channels inside the membrane, they too float around inside the membrane, but a channel is different because a channel is closed. And we said the channel works when it opens up. So when a signal comes in, it opens up, and then information or molecules can shoot down the tunnel, down into the cell. And they can only do signal comes in. Now let's put them together and see what happens when they come together. And the answer is this. The antenna on the left is going to scan the environment. Notice the shape of the protein inside the cell. It's a smooth tube. This is an connector called the G protein. Look at its shape. Can it plug onto that? Yes or no? When it opens and closes. But look. The wrong size signals don't go in, so the channels regulate which things can get in by opening and closing. So what we looked at is this. We saw signals come into antennas and change the structure of the receptor, and we saw that the output device, in this case a channel, can open or close when the